Most founders waste months and piles of money building products that no one wants to buy. What if you could sell your product to customers before you even tried to build it? In this episode of Fill the Boot, I'm talking to David Hirschfeld, founder of Tekyz and creator of the Launch First methodology. David shares how using high-fidelity mock-ups that look and feel just like your final product allow you to sell your product before building it and generate the revenue you need to actually create the solution. We also focus on common mistakes that founders often make, like focusing on solutions instead of the problems their customers have. And if you're thinking about raising money for your startup, I've created a quick and free quiz that you can take to see whether it's time to start reaching out to investors, and I'll put a link to that down in the description. David, welcome to Fill the Boot.
Well, thanks for having me, Lance.
I really am looking forward to this conversation. We've talked a little bit right before this episode about your approach to streamlining the startup and development process, but let's maybe start with a really quick background on how you got to this spot.
Yeah, sure, you bet. I've been in the software development world for over 35 years. Originally, I started with enterprise, in the enterprise working for Computer Associates and Texas Instruments, and then I ran software projects at Intel, Allied Signal, Arizona Public Service, and Motorola. So I came from an enterprise background, but then I started my own software company in the early 90s in logistics, route distribution, and inventory management. And despite every effort on my part and my partner's part, we grew it anyway to 800 customers in 22 countries over the next 8 years and sold it in 2000 to a publicly traded firm. I later started another software company in 95 for wholesale networking and wholesale auto dealers, and that one failed. I didn't follow the same playbook as I did with when I started my first company. And then out of the ashes of that, I started Tekyz, the company that I'm currently CEO of, 18 years ago. And I've been working with startups ever since, startups and mid-sized companies. But I've worked with over 90 startups during that period. A few of them really successful, most of them failed. And it's out of those failures that I identified the patterns that people that fail commonly have and the ones that are successful consistently have. And that's what led me to create Launch First methodology.
Got it. So what do you think was the key learning or difference between the first startup and your second one?
Well, and that's easy to distill out. The first one, we built a very, very light MVP and we put it on the market immediately and started selling it and got feedback from customers that it was sellable. And it was very, very limited in features. We didn't try to build in a lot of features and make it a truly highly engaging product. We just did the minimal possible and got it on the market and tested it and saw that people were buying it.
So
the second time around.
So that first one really just delivered that core value proposition, the one kind of capability that people were looking for.
Exactly. And we did it in about 2 months. I mean, it really was a minimal MVP, but we went out and sold it to see that we had the right message and we were targeting the right early adopter, and people needed what we had for the reasons that we thought. And so we thought we knew what we were doing. The second time around, I thought I would knew what I was doing too. And I built a business to business network of auto dealers and auto wholesalers with the idea that people looking for a car go to a dealer and and that dealer then tries to source it. And there was no good network for doing that without going to auctions. So that's what I created a website called Dealer Crossing, where I built this dealer to dealer network and I got traction and people were getting on, but I thought I would not charge them for the use of it. And I would build critical mass and I would raise money, the classic process of going forward. And I did get offered money right at the beginning. I was looking for $1.25 million, but they wanted a huge amount of equity and I wasn't willing to give up that much equity, but I then never got another offer. And eventually I ran out of money to fund the company. And so failed. And I see this all the time. Not that they get offered usually, but that I instead of going out and selling the product right from the beginning, like I did the first time, and proving a product market fit and getting paying users to help me build the network because they're invested in it, which is what I should have done. I went the critical mass route, which was just a big mistake. And because it was a good product, it had value and people really liked it, but I just ran out of money. And didn't want to start charging for it, so I didn't feel like I could charge enough. Again, that was a mistake. I should have charged whatever I needed to charge for the business to be able to generate enough income, because people would have stayed on it. The amount that I would have charged would have been trivial for the value that it was providing. Anyway, it's a lot of mistakes I made that I didn't learn from the most important lessons the first time around, that caused me to fail. And I didn't even realize what those lessons that I missed the first time that made me fail the second time. I thought they were just two completely different things.
I mean, that's the funny thing, that you don't learn from successes. That it's hard to know what is it about the success was the important piece, and it's when things don't work, they're like, oh, that's what was important.
Right. I thought I had a vision. I really believed in this vision. It made sense to me. That's all that it took, as long as I stayed true and focused on my vision. And those, I've learned, are code words for I'm going to fail.
Got it. So tell me a little bit about this process that you've developed now, and how does that apply to startups? And are there any particular kinds of startups that is particularly relevant to?
Yeah, and that's really the right question too, because this is this is all about doing pre-launch sales. Now, what I've learned is you don't even need a product to start to generate revenue from the product. You can generate revenue from a well-developed concept where you can show enough value that you're providing to a stakeholder who's suffering from some problem that you're solving. And what we do is we build what we call a high-fidelity prototype, but it's basically it's a mock-up prototype that looks like real software. So when you demo it to somebody, they cannot tell that you're demoing an animated mock-up. They think it's real product. It's not an MVP. It shows the whole 2-year roadmap of the product, but it's just a design mock-up. It's just a very realistic one. And it's a critical success factor because people need to believe you can deliver the thing you're selling them. If it's not, because you haven't built it yet. And as long as it's realistic enough looking, they believe it. If it looks like just click-through mock-ups, then they don't know that you can build it. And so you can't sell in that case. So this came out of the fact that we've been doing these animated design mock-ups for about 12 years. And we did it because it reduced the amount of iteration that we would have during development. Because founders didn't realize when they approved the mock-ups what they were committing to in terms of the entire workflow. And the developers weren't exactly sure how they needed to deliver the user experience. And so we'd have all this rework during development. Once we finally adopted this animated mock-up where we go into incredible detail in the design process, all that iteration went almost completely away. And the development went much faster. The founder knew exactly what to expect when they got pieces of the product to test. And then, and it was just more efficient. So these mock-ups were so realistic, I thought to myself, why don't we go to the potential target market and do some pre-launch sales? Use that money to help fund development, improve the product market fit, and validate what the pricing model should be and all those sorts of things. That's where Launch First came from. And watching so many startups fail because they waited way too long to start selling their product, only to find out they built the wrong product for the wrong market.
Okay. So with this approach, the super high fidelity mock-up, it really means there's no hand waving over any detail. Every piece of the onboarding, every piece of the interaction, every single possible click has been drilled down at that phase before you're actually writing any code.
Every piece of that workflow that's critical to the user experience of using the product, including on-screen behavior and things like that. So actually, the question you had asked me was if there's certain type of startups that this really applies to. So this is great for B2B startups, SaaS products, B2B to B products, or B2B to C products. B2C, if it's a high value C, high value customer that you can target. It not really for e-commerce. There are things in e-commerce, if you have a product, that are great crowdfunding and Kickstarter type of things, right? So that's a similar concept where you're pre-launch selling something just to a mass market instead of to a very specific user where you're solving a specific problem. So it's ideal for B2B. That's really the sweet spot for this.
And do you find that this approach of leading with the pre-sale sort of forces a higher degree of product market fit? That is, it's harder to sell something that doesn't exist than something it does. So does that force the founder and the developers to hone their idea to the point where it's attractive, even in theory, rather than actually being in front of someone?
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because really it's not. If you've identified the correct, the ideal early adopter niche, and you are identified the real problem that you're solving for them, and it's a high value problem, and they feel very impacted by the problem, personally impacted by this problem, and you give them a high enough value opportunity to get it early, and they know they need the product, they're going to buy it once it comes out, and they don't want to miss out on getting it early at this incredible value, then it's not harder to sell at that point, actually. What it does force you to do is really nail down who that early adopter is. And we have a methodology for doing that as well, which is very metrics-driven methodology, but then you test it against the market. And if you've got the idea is when founders launch a company, when they come up with an idea and they want to execute on it, they have one job they should do at the very beginning. And all founders know this when you say it to them, but nobody's telling them this and they don't realize it. And that's, they have to figure out who is that niche they're going to focus on to begin with. And what is the number one and two problems that they struggle with that you're trying to address. You figure that out by listing all your niches and all the root level problem statements that you're solving, and then scoring it in two ways. One is, how much does that founder perceive they're impacted by that problem in that niche? So you end up with basically a spreadsheet with all these cells that you're scoring. And secondly, how much does that niche, how much does it cost that niche because of that problem? And those two numbers are independent of each other. The perception of the problem and the actual cost. And you need them both high, because if the perceived impact is high, then when you talk about the problem to that niche, they'll lean forward, because all of a sudden somebody understands what I'm struggling with, and they'll want to know if you can fix it for them. And because the cost is high, you can charge for it, and you charge a lot for it. And so you need to find those two things, and that's how you nail that. And there's other things that go into that too, but those are the two main things you need to nail down to figure out who your early adopter niche is.
So when you're working with a founder, are they starting with sort of a specific problem or type of category of solution that they're looking at, and then looking at all the different kinds of people? Or is this a wider net kind of approach where how broadly do they go with this initial filter level?
Okay, well, that's also a great question, because a typical founder says, I want to build this product because everybody needs this for this reason. I go, okay, that's cool. Okay, I don't care about the product. All I care about is the problem, because the problem is really the thing that you want to focus on, and how well you understand the problem. But they want to focus on the solution because they're past problem solving. They've already solved it. And now they have this vision, and they believe in themselves, and all the pitfalls. They're wearing a black robe, going out preaching about their problem, right? So I gently peel that black robe off them, and then sort of delicately put the white coat on them, and try to turn them into clinicians, and say, look, everything you believe is an assumption. So now we have to test all these assumptions and see which ones are right and which ones are wrong, and how do we make adjustments based on the testing that we do and the results of that. So the launch first is about, founders that believe in their vision and have a vision and think if they just stay positive and focus on their vision, they're going to be successful, like I said, are kind of code words for I'm going to fail. Or I've got a unicorn, this is the next unicorn and everybody needs this product. Founders who are consistently successful and like serial entrepreneurs are ones that love the problem. They just spend all their energy understanding the problem, focusing on the problem and talking to customers. They want to talk to customers and they want to focus on their problem. They never talk about the solution to their problem to customers. They just talk about the problem to understand it. The solution, the product is just the natural process of mitigating the problem. And when you think like that, you build products that people need and willing to pay for.
Yeah, I like that approach because I certainly see a lot of founders who will go talk to potential customers and they'll sort of ask them a leading question, like, would this be useful to you? And they'll often get a yes. Yeah, that would be helpful. It would be nice if it existed. But they're never asking, is this your most burning priority? If this was in front of you, would you buy it or would you go address some other problem? And so they got happy ears, built the things, and then they can't sell them because it's not the priority.
Right, exactly. Founders don't know how to ask those questions. What are your problems? I have a list of problems that I'm sort of focused around. How much do these impact you? Do you have different problems that impact you more? What have you done in the past to address these problems? Have those things worked well? What are they? How much does this problem affect you personally? What's the actual cost of the company as a result of having to deal with this problem? Is there any political will around addressing this problem if there was a way to mitigate this problem, right? These are all the questions founders should be asking. And people want to talk about their problems, right? Because they're hoping that you'll be able to help them work through it. They don't want to talk about your solution. Yeah, you won't get honest answers from people when you say, well, I was thinking of creating, doing this. Do you think that would help? They may say, yeah, I think that would help a lot. That doesn't help you in any way, because until they actually use your product to solve that problem, you don't really know if the thing that you built is going to help them. But if you understand the problem really, really well, like at a cellular level, the chance that you build the wrong thing is dramatically reduced. And the chance that you won't be able to sell it goes way down because you can get their attention because you're talking about the thing they care about the most. And that's a problem that impacts them personally and is costing them a lot of money. There's a great book, by the way. It's my favorite business book about this topic. It's called The Mom Test. Because whenever you go to your mom with a business idea, right, assuming you have a good relationship with your mom, you ask her what she thinks about the business idea. I've got this idea. I'm going to have recipes delivered to you real time from an app. And somebody will come and teach you how to do it, and it'll be very inexpensive, and so it'll be Uber chef educator. That's my idea. And your mom's going to go, oh, that's brilliant. You're so smart. I know you'll make it successful. I would love that service. You're not going to get honest answers from her. So, right. So the book is all about how do you ask questions from your mom about your business idea and actually get honest, useful answers. That's why it's called the Mom Test. A lot of the things I've been talking about, he really articulates it and has a system around how you do this at different stages of your startup, from concept to selling your product.
So we started our conversation talking about this sort of high fidelity mockup and actually pre-selling that to customers. But your process then is starting actually much earlier than that, when you're doing a lot of deep exploration and validation around making sure that you're even going to build the right mockup.
That's exactly right. I mean, we start at the requirements stage to understand what the product is. We always understand what the product is that they want to build and capture all those requirements. And then we spend a lot of time understanding what problem it solves. And very often founders really struggle to talk about the problem. I say, so tell me what problem are you solving with this capability here? What's the problem? And then they tell, or what problem are you solving? And they give me a feature. And I say, well, that's not a problem, that's a feature. And then they give me a benefit. Well, it's going to help people in this way. I said, okay, that's great, but what's the problem? And I usually have to dig down quite a bit before they actually can articulate what problem they're trying to fix. They know it usually at an instinctual level. Very often it's a problem they've been struggling with themselves. Those are founders who are trying to really solve an organic problem that they struggle with. But they have a lot of trouble once they started thinking of the solution. They can't step back and get back into thinking about the problem. It's an interesting, but it's consistent across almost all founders.
Yeah, it feels like it's related to that kind of 5 whys sort of approach where you need to keep digging into it. I mean, I see so many startups now that are pitching solving loneliness, which is just entirely too vague a concept to be an actual specific problem that you're solving.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, you can't solve loneliness. I mean, you're right. You can't solve that. You might be able to solve some nuance of it, right? That's within a certain context, but you can't solve that. The 5 whys is I call it the 3 whys, but the 5 whys is probably right most of the time. And you're at a root level problem when the person says, I am afraid, or I feel threatened because of this problem, because it will cause this. That's when you're at the root. And until you get there, you're not at the root.
I like it.
Until you get to, they have to feel threatened by the problem. And you have to be able to express that threat. And the reason that matters is I've learned, this is something I learned, and I'm not sure exactly when I learned this, but because I used to kind of argue against it, and it eventually just became obvious to me. You only are motivated to do something because you feel threatened at a survival level in some other way, and you're trying to eliminate that feeling of threat. It's the only thing that motivates you to wake up in the morning, to eat your breakfast, to go on a vacation. You see the beautiful Hawaiian vacation, and the first thing you think is, if I don't do that, I'm going to miss out on, living a full, rich life and all the things. It's all fear drives it all. So, right, if you had no fear about anything and you felt perfectly satisfied, you'd have no motivation to do anything different than you do. Why would I go on that vacation? I'm not getting anything out of that.
That's right. You're just going to sit under the Bodhi tree and contemplate infinity for all your time.
Exactly. Pretty much. Right. Exactly. Right.
So one of the things that I've been seeing is with AI being such a Swiss Army knife, it feels like people are just exploding with ideas for where to go, what kind of business to build, everything. We're just going to snap AI onto it. So what are your thoughts about how to validate that when it seems like such a kind of universal tool to solve all problems?
Well, it's an amazing tool. I mean, we are embracing it big time, both internally in my company as well as with our clients. Adding AI and workflows, building AI applications. I mean, it's amazing it's way farther ahead, much faster than I ever thought. I thought we'd be here in 10 years, not where we are right now. It just came up really quick. So, so when it comes to it being the Swiss Army knife, it's sort of like having a best friend that just knows everything about everything, right? And you can chat with it anytime you want, but not everybody uses AI as effectively as they could. One way I try to explain to people when they're not using AI as effectively as they could is, are you asking AI how you should be thinking about things and what questions you should be asking when you're trying to solve a problem, how you should approach something, because that gets the conversation, and treat it like a conversation where you're speaking to it like it's a person that just happens to be or an advisor or a consultant, and let it frame things for you. So I'll give you a good example, totally outside of the context of software. Or actually, I can give you a couple examples. One was from 2 years ago, and one just happened a few weeks ago. 2 years ago, when ChatGPT was just a few months old, we had just bought our house in San Diego. My wife and I are standing in our backyard, and she asked me, how many beds do you think I would need for growing vegetables? She wants to grow all our vegetables. She loves to do gardening. And I love when she does gardening, and because we got to have all these fresh vegetables and fruits. I said, I don't know. She had some formula that she had heard of, and I said, let's ask ChatGPT. I've been telling her about this thing. She said, okay. And so I got out my phone, and her sister called right then. So she gets on a call with her sister. They're talking about the move in the backyard. And I get on the conversation with ChatGPT, and I say, we're two people in our early 60s. We eat a lot of vegetables, but not only vegetables. We live in this climate in Vista, California. My wife wants to grow all her own vegetables. This is literally the conversation I had. And she wants to know how to plan the garden and how many beds she's going to need, what size and all that. What questions should I be asking? And then it gave me a list of questions. Then I said, those questions look good. Go ahead and answer them. And it answered all the questions. And I had a 5-minute conversation with ChatGPT. At the end of it, I had a year-around schedule for, I think it was 6 beds, 6 4x4 beds, and what goes in each of the beds at what month of the year to plant and what month of the year to harvest. And it took into consideration companion planting, where, certain things in the beds grow with other things and don't like to grow with other things. And then succession planting, when you harvest those, what is that soil now ideal for? What other vegetables go in after that, right? And because you don't want to, you grow onions, and there's certain vegetables that like that soil and others that hate it. And then what companion flowers do you put? Because certain vegetables attract certain types of bugs, and certain flowers, you grow them alongside it. The bugs like those flowers, the same bugs like those flowers more, and it keeps them off. Anyway, gave us a schedule for the entire year for all the beds. And she got off the phone with her sister, and she said, what were we talking about? And I said, here. I showed her the ChatGPT and laid it all out in tables, and her jaw hit the floor. I mean, she could not believe. She looked at it, and she knows a lot about gardening. She said, it would take me days to do this. All looks correct. How did you, she started asking me questions. That's an example. That was 2 years ago. Technology's way better now than it was back then. Just a few weeks ago, my wife and I went to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the largest gem and mineral show in the world. Takes over the entire city. To give you an idea, the Tucson Convention Center, I think they have 40 or 50 locations throughout the city. The Tucson Convention Center is just one of the locations, and it's nowhere near the biggest location. It's massive. And people that go to this, their complaint is they didn't plan it well enough. And so they feel like they missed a lot of it. And so I had a conversation with ChatGPT, and their deep research tool had just come out. And I asked it to do research. I said, here's what our objective is. We want to try to find something for our entryway, this size, this type of thing. So plan the trip so we see a lot of variety, just in case we find something else we want. But we want it to be large. And where do we go? And what's the order of places that we should go, so that at the end of the show, we're ready to make deals. And it laid out the entire itinerary for us, which shows to go to, what booths at those shows were known for these types of minerals and rocks, and where to eat on each one, and put them in an order so that we weren't driving all over town. And at the end, we followed it, and we ended up buying exactly what we wanted. It was really pretty amazing.
It really is fantastic at those things. I think that also raises sort of a challenge for a lot of founders who are wanting to do AI startups. Is like, oh my God, AI can do this really well. And so they'll throw a wrapper around it. They'll, put a little bit of secret sauce around, let's say, help me plan travel itineraries specific to my interests. But the problem there seems to be that there's very little moat to it, right? But anyone can wrap ChatGPT and, throw in a little bit of fairy dust and get a tool that's really useful and can do these things. So when you're working with someone, how do you tell the difference between a viable AI-driven idea and one that is just going to be a me too, and fundamentally it has no chance of standing out from the crowd?
Well, I think the first thing, and that's, I think about that a lot, right? And the first thing is, are there already things that do that? Hopefully the founder's already done some research, but it's surprising how many founders have ideas and they say, I want to build this, and they have not researched the market, and somehow they expect me to know what's out there. And in some contexts I do, but for most of them, I have no idea without doing my own research. So the first thing is research what's out there and how you would accomplish this right now. And if it's a complicated workflow to do the thing, you've got a chance of building something of value if that's a high value thing that you're delivering. And I can give you a lot of examples of what those things look like, because AI cannot, there's a lot it cannot do yet, all by itself. And it will be quite a while before it can do a lot of these things. So a lot of complex workflows. One example is I'm a distribution company, and I buy, sell, and ship all around the world these parts, and I buy of different categories, and I buy them from different distributors. And so I get orders from customers, and then I send out orders to a bunch of different distributors, and then those distributors then send me invoices along with the shipping information, and I have to correlate and make all this match and work. And there's lots of discrepancies. And right now, so AI is really good at, if you build automation to automate this workflow, at looking at because a lot of these orders come in PDF, and a lot of these other orders come in from like emails, embedded in emails, the invoices and things like that. And so I can grab all those documents, have AI parse it, and I have to do it with a really high level of confidence that it's understood everything in the email. And the part that I got an order for, then when it comes back from the supplier, it's named something different because that's how they refer to it. And I have to be able to become smart enough to know that these are the same products in the case of this supplier, but it wouldn't be the same product in the case of this other supplier. This is an example of where AI you can build automation that's really smart and has huge value, because it literally is eliminating mistakes and reducing the need of having all this manual review of these invoices and orders from these different groups and reconciling them all together. But you couldn't just ask AI to just go out and do this for me right now, right? It can't do that. You have to feed it information. You have to do it in a certain sequence. And then when it's done, I need to update my ERP system, right, with the change, because it found a discrepancy. Its confidence that this is the correct thing is 100% no, and now can go and automate the update. Lots and lots of those things like that are being built. Automated outreach and that's personalized in marketing. Those things are all very real and valuable. We're building stuff internally, for example, managing projects. One of the big thing whenever you're managing a complex software project is you always have these status meetings. You have this list of things you're working on and list of things that have been completed, all these different builds that you're scheduling with different pieces being included in each of these builds, and they're scheduled out several weeks. Whenever somebody reports a bug, it goes into the system. Does the founder or the person you're doing the development for report the bug directly in the system, or do they send an email that somebody has to interpret and put in the system? And if they want to know the status of that bug, who are they going to ask? So we're building a voice front UI for this that will learn the person's project, all the details, and stay up to date as the details change. They can say, I have a bug, and it can say, oh, that bug was already reported. It's medium priority. Do you want me to change it? And they say, yeah. When will that be scheduled to be out? And it'll tell it when it's scheduled. If it changes priority, it can come out sooner or later. Here's what the build schedule is, right? And stuff like that. Huge value. To my team, it's a big value. To my customers, it's a big value. And it's something that, development shops all can use. And so this is something one of several things we're building right now.
Okay. So let's think about a non-technical founder who's gone through your process. They've talked to the customers. They've done this high-fidelity mock-up. They're doing some pre-sales. Now they actually need to build this thing. What is your suggestion for how to approach that step in the process? Putting together the team. What kind of a team do you need? Right? Is it important to be bringing in the ultimate rock stars, or do they just need sort of a competent group of people who can execute? How do you guide people through that?
I tell them to just hire me and my team, because that's what we do. And we're really good. But if they want to build their own team, if they can find a rock star that won't require most of their equity and a crazy salary, then that's great. The problem is, how do they, and they're non-technical founders, how do they know if they're rock stars? A lot of people will claim to be rock stars because they came from some big success and they really weren't a critical factor in that success. You just don't know if you're not in this world. They say, okay, I can just go offshore and get a really cheap build, and those are 99% of the time disasters. Not because they're offshore, but because the non-technical founder has no idea how to validate the skill of the team and their ability to deliver. Just because they have a portfolio of stuff they can point to doesn't mean that their 3-month estimate doesn't turn into 15 months of misery. The best thing I could say would be just feel free to give me a call and I'd be happy to coach you. Even coach you not to hire me if what you want to do is do something else. And I would do that at no cost, because I hate to see people get stuck in these disaster projects.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating than seeing someone who's got some really good fundamentals but gets mired down in some specific aspect of the business that ends up holding them back in a big way. So when you're coaching or working with founders, how do you suggest that they think about their role evolving over time from sort of the earliest days through until they're kind of launched and getting well into the market?
So I was just talking with somebody else about this. There's this concept of 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000. And that's in terms of generating customers or generating X times that revenue. And it's a logarithmic kind of effect where to get your first customer is not the same effort, same process that you need to get your first 10. And once you've gotten 10, now what you need to do to get your first 100 is different. The systems that you have for getting those 10 are not quite what you need. You need more scale and automation now. And once you get to 100, to get to 1,000 at that level is another level of infrastructure and growth and change that you have to implement in your organization. So, but all those things you really can't anticipate unless this is your fourth company in the same market that you've been successful in the past, and you know what that trajectory looks like exactly. So what I say to founders is work on, focus on that first initial sales. That's what, and how do you get a repetitive, predictable process where you can keep selling in this pre-launch model, because that will fund your development and it will create a large group of very invested beta testers who will give you the kind of feedback you really need once the product comes out. And once the product's out, you're focusing most of your initial efforts on what I call product solution fit, not product market fit. Product market fit you already have because you know how to sell it, right? That's what product market fit is. Product solution fit is, now are people getting the value out of the product? They're engaging. You're going to keep these customers long-term because you've delivered something that's usable and cost them less now to use your product to mitigate the problem than what the problem cost them. And so that's what you're trying to nail down in the early days with an MVP is product solution fit. Once you've got that and you start to build your marketing systems and start to build some infrastructure for growing your partnerships or whatever your marketing plan is, then that's where your focus shifts to. And you can't really see much past that. You can build a 5-year plan, right? And show these hockey stick curve forecasts, and they never come to pass. And that shouldn't be the thing but you need to do that if you're trying to get investors. But if what you're trying to do is build a really sustainable business, then you want to get to 1 million in sales and you want to get to 3 to 5 million in sales, right? And maybe this might be a first year to 2 years, then 3 to 5 years. You get to 5 million in sales. Now you're working at growing that to 10 to $15 million in sales. And you've got a cash flowing, profitable business that has huge value in the market if you were to sell it. That's what people should be focused on. And if it turns out that you got hit the nail on the head, you're the 1 in 1,000, and it takes off into 500 million in sales in 3 years, and you have all these VCs throwing billions at you, great. Just don't plan around that, because you'll just be disappointed and you'll be focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah. So how does that play into the question of if and when these companies should be thinking about fundraising?
My philosophy is you shouldn't fundraise because you need money to run your company. You should fundraise because you now have a model that works, and you want to accelerate the growth and capture market share faster. That's a good reason to fundraise. Or if you just happen to be in the right place, in the right time, with the right technology in the right market, like in healthcare, biotech, and you've come out with an AI nurse or whatever, that and you have connections in that world so that you're talking with state Medicaid organizations, for example. Okay, now that's a different story because you need big dollars to prosecute that business. But again, that's the 1 in 1,000. It's a tiny percentage of companies are set up like that and have where a CEO has the gravitas and the reach to pull those kinds of relationships together early on. So, but what most people try to do is they build an MVP and a pitch deck and they try to raise money from investors, and they just suffer and struggle, and they do friends and family round, and struggling to sell their product, which is what they should have been focusing on right from the beginning. So if you need the money just to run, you probably shouldn't be trying to raise money. If you need it to grow and to accelerate your growth, then that's a good time to consider, because you're also in a powerful position because you're showing traction and product market fit, and then people want to invest in you, and you can do it in a leveraged way.
It's the classic story that the correct time to raise money is when you don't need it. You may be able to use it, you may want it, but if you need it, you're over a barrel, and there's always some real challenges there.
Yeah, step back and pivot if you actually really need it. And I'm not saying that's always true, but that's probably 95% of the time true. If you need it, it's probably not well, first of all, it's going to be incredibly hard to get it if you need it. And secondly, you're not getting it for the right reason. It used to be a lot easier to raise money, and founders that were in the right market at the right time with the right background, people would throw a lot of money at them, and then they'd blow it all. Such huge failures, and in the last 10 years, I can think of several, where they got $30 million in a seed round and blew it all.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I had a lot of competitors that got heavily funded in the late 90s, on a wing and a prayer, and then things got tight, and they went into the ground with their afterburners on because they had no way to pull up, and it was completely inviable. And this probably also explains why it's so difficult to do fundraising for example, hardware companies. With a SaaS company, the cost of producing the solution, particularly a very limited focused one, is usually pretty straightforward. But a lot of hardware companies, they're capital intensive. They literally can't even come out with a first prototype without spending some significant dollars.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Hardware companies, I don't spend my energy there because I'm a software developer. But software companies, even still, it still costs money to build something of value that is scalable, that is appropriate for a large market, to penetrate a market. It still costs money to do that. So that's why it makes a lot more sense to have your customers fund the development instead of trying to raise money from investors to get the initial anchor in the market and position in the market, and then raise money because you're in a good position to do it. That's assuming you even want to raise money. You might have figured out a way of prosecuting your business without having to raise money, and now you don't have anybody you have to answer to. You can just grow it the way you want.
Yeah, because absolutely, right? Once you start taking money, particularly from venture capital firms, you are absolutely making a commitment to a certain kind of path and a certain kind of growth.
You're on the hook, and you need to grow at a very accelerated rate, or you lose control of the company, because the VC won't get involved if they don't have that ability to pretty much take it away from you when you fall short.
Yeah. And they're looking for that 30% month over month sustained over a number of years, which is a big commitment.
Which is great, which can happen, but it's the rare founder that is in that position to deliver that. Yeah.
No, I think that's very true. Most companies are never, most very successful companies are never going to be in quite that spot.
Right. Yeah. And plus your chances, all the time you spend trying to raise money None of that goes into actually building your business in any measurable way. And your chances of being able to raise money from VCs are so tiny. The numbers that I had corroborated a couple of years ago from several VCs is they'll see 3,000 pitch decks, and out of 3,000 pitch decks, they'll invest in 30 of those companies, of which 70% fail. So yeah, right. So out of your chances of ever seeing any money from a VC are incredibly small. Yes. 1 in 1,000, I guess, is what it roughly works out to.
Absolutely. I mean, I know as an angel investor, I get cold pitched something like 1,000 times a year, right? And I'm not making dozens of investments. I'm making, a couple. And so the numbers are insane.
Yeah.
So any other sort of closing thoughts, advice, any questions I missed here that you think are important to share?
I'll give you a prediction. If your audience you think would be interested in predictions, don't invest in parking lots or in multi-level parking structures. I see in some 3, 4, 5, 6 years, probably not 3 years, probably more like 5, 6 years with self-driving cars. There'll be a critical mass at some point, and it will be much bigger critical mass than like Uber and Lyft and things like that, because it won't be dependent on people driving them, and it will be much cheaper and safer, and people will just stop buying cars and stop driving their own cars for most things. It'll just be a point of critical mass. We'll already start seeing a little of that with millennials and Gen Z, where they're not as interested to have a driver's license, where that was when we were kids, I don't know anybody that wasn't like desperate to turn 16 and get their driver's license. But now it's like there's no hurry, because it's just so easy to get around. And when you don't even have a driver you have to deal with, and that means the cost is going to come down, there'll be competitive pressures, and there just won't be, and these lots and these parking garages are just going to be empty. They'll start building homes differently, I think, where the idea of a 2-car garage is like a crazy luxury, because even a 1-car garage is kind of a luxury. That's just storage. So, driveways, and I mean, so there's a prediction. It's one of the few predictions I feel safe I can make. The rest of them is really tough to make.
Yeah, people talk a lot about drones and all these, air taxis, but the shift towards self-driving vehicles that you just summon, you don't need to, right, it doesn't need to park somewhere, you don't need to worry about maintenance tails, there's no cost of ownership when you're not using it. That just feels like an economic imperative that's going to be hard to avoid.
I think in 10 to 15 years, then those drones will be a reality, because we'll have the battery power so that they can fly, pretty good distances without ever needing to worry about being charged. But there'll be a premium. So you only do that because you're in a hurry to get somewhere. You have to go all the way across town. You want to get out of all the traffic or whatever. But they'll be just part of the whole transport constellation at that point. But the self-driving cars, that's just a no-brainer in cities, obviously not in rural areas. Maybe that'll come too, but that's going to be a much farther out.
Right. Yeah. If the nearest one that's going around is a 15-minute drive to get to you, to pick you up, suddenly the convenience equation changes pretty substantially.
Right. And I don't think there'll be 15 minutes. Yeah, right. You're saying in rural areas, right?
Yeah, in rural areas,
but
exactly.
Right. But like right now, if I go to Phoenix, which I go every month because my mother still lives there, and so every month I go and I do a day trip out there, and I've been taking Waymos for the last few months. I've been using the Waymo, which is a great experience, and they are never more than 2 or 3 minutes away. So in and around the airport, and even in the north part of town, they're often available within 5 to 7 minutes, even in the north part of the Phoenix area. And now they kept expanding their area so that I could get to my mother's, but it was all surface streets, and they now just enabled the freeways. So I can get there just as fast, and it's half the price of taking an Uber or a Lyft to get in a Waymo, and the experience is excellent.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. So yeah,
things are changing fast. I live out in the boonies. It's a 10-minute drive from my house to the gate of my community. So it'll be a
wow,
while before
that
we
is
get that.
you're in the boonies in your gated community. You're in the boonies. That's pretty funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, we're way out there, but awesome. So where can people find you? What should they where should they look you up?
Well, thank you for asking me that. And there you can find me at tekyz.com, and Tekyz is spelled Tekyz, Tekyz. Anybody made it to the end of the show, I'm happy to give you my email address. It won't be in the links, but it's David at Tekyz. And I just like to talk about technology and startups and AI and automation. And if you want to just chat, I'd be happy to. Or look me up on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, David Hirschfeld.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's very generous. I really appreciate that. Hopefully some of the viewers will be able to take you up on that. And it's been great talking with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Lance. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
I hope you found my conversation with David as interesting as I did. We covered a lot of territory, specifically talking about how you can use high-fidelity mockups to test the demand for your product and even pre-sell it to customers before you even start to build it. And we explored how many founders get stuck focusing on their solution rather than talking to customers and really understanding the problem that they're solving. If you're thinking about raising money for your company, take my quick free quiz to see whether you're ready to start reaching out to investors. I'll put a link to that down in the description. And if you want to explore this idea of testing your ideas and validating whether or not there's customer demand, I encourage you to check out this episode here on pre-pivoting your company, discovering what assumptions you've gotten wrong and changing your company before you even take a step to developing anything. Until next time, ciao.